Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. Today on our show, we have two people on our show from Freightos, and today we have Anton Barr, the Vice President for Market Data, and Judah Levine, a research lead. And today we're speaking about data in the freight industry. So welcome Anton and Judah. I'm excited to have both of you on the show today.
Thank you.
Hi, Catherine. Excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And can we go ahead and just, both of you can just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us more about your company.
Right. So my name is Anton Barr. My background is predominantly technical. I did a master's degree in computer science and math, focusing on research how data flows in large heterogeneous systems. And then I worked for 10 years in a data management company. We didn't call it back then. And then I founded my own company with several other people, which was acquired later by Dun & Bradstreet. And today I'm the head of Freightos Data, one of the business units of Freightos. So a few words about Freightos. We like to call ourselves the digital backbone. So essentially we're a software company that connects different types of companies across the supply chain. And that starts with, as you can see on the slide, with carriers on the left. So these are the companies that actually own vessels, ships and airplanes and trucks and trains, etc. So we connect them to freight forwarders, which are brokers, like a traveling agent used to be many years ago. So the brokers actually provide the services to shippers. These are the customers. So these are either very small companies or large enterprises. They all use the freight forwarding services. As you can imagine, this operation, the exhaust of this operation, so to speak, is really billions of data points, pricing, etc. That's what Freightos does, and I'll be happy to elaborate how the data is useful later.
I'm Judah Levine. I'm research lead at Freightos. My background is in market research. At Freightos, I use our access to all these different types of data that we're able to collect from the different solutions that we offer to produce research and analysis that provides insights about what's going on in the industry and help show how data enables clarity and visibility and hopefully efficiencies that may not have been possible before. And we produce these research and insights as part of our marketing initiatives.
Yeah, that sounds great. And it's super interesting because this is an industry that's very unique. We've never had anybody on the podcast with this specific industry. So I'm excited to hear more about both of your work. I wanted to talk to Anton for the first question. It's just that data is used in many different industries and data can be used in many different ways depending on the industry. So specifically in the freight industry, how is data being used just to improve the company overall?
Right. So first of all, let me give a little background on how much data there is about it. So just look around you in the room. About 90% of the goods that you can see, the clothes, the furniture, the electronics that you use, this is all probably was manufactured someplace else, not where you are at the moment. And it doesn't land in the stores by magic. It is brought in containers. So every year there is about 11 billion of tons of goods that are being shipped around the world from one continent to another, and these are brought on ships and airplanes, etc. And think about the number of hands that this data, these shipments change. So think about a box or a container that goes out of a gate in Chinese manufacturing, Shenzhen, for instance, China, right? And then it's picked up by a truck, brought to a container yard at a Shanghai port, for instance, Hong Kong, etc. Then it's loaded on a ship, etc. And it's brought to the destination port, and then all the rest of the delivery with custom inspection and duties and documentation and so on. So think about how many stakeholders there are in every shipment. There are carriers, there are freight forwarders, there are shippers, ocean port, airports, banks, insurance companies, customs, etc., etc. So every shipment, and there are, like I said, 11 billion tons are being shipped every year. So every shipment involves, I think, thousands of data points, thousands of data fields, and it generates billions of rows, and that's what we deal with. So our refresh rate is about 100 million of price points every month. And in addition to this gigantic volume of data, there is also another issue, which is less expected. So there are two main issues in this industry. First of all, it's very much manual still. So some carriers, many carriers, probably most of the carriers, they still provide the data as Excel files via emails to the brokers or to the customers. So think about how many errors can be made. Fat finger type of errors, missing decimal points, missing currency codes, wrong codes, etc. That's issue number one. Issue number two, this industry also very opaque. So there's a huge spread of prices for the same type of service. So two different customers may pay a huge difference. So one pay $100 for a service, and the other may pay $160 for the exactly same thing. So when you combine the two issues, the errors and the spread, it creates an interesting challenge, professional challenge, to detect outliers, to detect prices that are wrong, that are errors. So technically speaking, usually when you have normal distribution and like curved, bell curved shape type of histogram, then it's pretty much easy. You usually use percentiles or standard deviations, so 2 sigmas in every direction from the average gives you 95% of the data, which is correct, and the rest of the data is usually garbage. So that's simple. Now in freight, it doesn't look like that at all. So the histogram of freight pricing is like Manhattan skyline. You have the Freedom Tower on one end, and some buildings, let's say, some peaks in the middle, and some on the right. And then that's the kind of issue that we need to deal with. And we need to identify the good prices, the real correct prices from the outliers. That's why we developed our own method that's built on median absolute deviation method, MAD, what we call in the industry, plus some machine learning. Not be able to go into the details, but that's something, this is professional challenge that we have to deal with. And that's, I think, what I find the most interesting as a data person and a math person in this job.
Yeah, definitely. And specifically, I know offline you had told me about the Freightos Baltic Index. And could you tell us and the audience more about what this is and how it's really improving your industry specifically?
So Freightos Baltic Index is a joint project that we do together with the Baltic Exchange, our partner, and the benchmark administrator. And what it brings to the industry is really transparency of the pricing. As I mentioned, there is little to none really transparency in this business. And so it brings transparency on the pricing of shipments from regions to regions. So starting from the usual suspect, China, East Asia to North America, West Coast, for instance. So it's not port to port, it's not very specific, but it gives you the general figure how the price changes daily. It's a huge thing for freight forwarders and for customers, because you have a rough estimation of how much each service can cost and how it changes daily. So for instance, there is such a thing that's called long-term contracts in this industry. And this system is a little bit broken, because when the price goes up or down, one of the sides have to feel a little bit silly, like they end the short end of the stick. So you agree for 3 years for a fixed price, and then the price go up, and the freight forwarder tells you, well, we agreed on the price, but look at what the market is doing right now. I cannot give you the same price like it used to be half a year ago. So there is a better alternative to that. And the Freightos Baltic Index is really designed for what's called index-linked contracts. So instead of just agreeing on one fixed price, which is unreasonable for a very short time nowadays, because the prices change so frequently, and use index-linked contracts instead. So that's one of the uses of FBX. And the obvious other is just basic benchmarking. How I'm doing? Do I overpay? Do I underpay?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I wanted to bring Judah into this conversation as well. So how does your work specifically kind of complement Anton, and how do you work together?
So as I said before, my role is to provide insights from the different types of data that we're able to collect. So if we see kind of on the right side of what we do, we connect shippers with freight forwarders, so importers, exporters with logistics providers or brokers. And that's on the Freightos.com marketplace. So that, brings a bunch of different service providers for shippers to choose from. And to book freight, the idea is to do it just about as easily as you would book a flight or a hotel. And so from there, we get to see a lot of kind of shipper behavior. How are different sized businesses, where are they shipping, what types, how are things going on in the world impacting how importers are behaving. And then on the other side, we connect carriers, the oceans and airlines with freight forwarders, with those brokers. And that's also, as Anton said, there's a ton of rate data going back and forth, and also is able to connect them to allow them to connect digitally in order to do bookings and things like that. And there are insights to be had there as well. But kind of the almost as a byproduct of all this rate data that we have, that was kind of the birth of the FBX, of the Freightos Baltic Index. And that's where Anton and I overlap the most. So I produce a weekly kind of freight update of what's going on in the industry based on the behavior of our index, and try and show what is happening in the industry and how that's being reflected in freight rate prices. So that's the overlap with Anton.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the effects of the pandemic have really affected the index overall in terms of just pricing and money in general. But in your opinion, Judah, how are you envisioning the index will be impacted post-pandemic, and how are carriers going to be making more money?
It's an interesting question. And Anton, I think we could jump to the next slide. So this is data from our FBX, from the Freightos Baltic Index. And again, these are the prices to ship a 40-foot container from one region to another region. If we look in blue, those are from Asia to the US, that's East Coast and West Coast. The orange and yellows are Asia to Mediterranean and Europe, so essentially to ports in Europe. And then the green is transatlantic. And if I could just describe kind of what's happened, and then we can talk about, where we think this is going. But it's very interesting because in this case, it's a chance to take freight rate data, which might not be that so interesting to most people most of the time. And I think it gives a good reflection of how people's lives really have changed, or part of what's changed of our lives over the course of the pandemic. So if we look at those blue lines, so this is to ship a container from Asia to the United States, we see that they more or less stayed level for the first part of last year after the pandemic broke out until about the end of May. And up until that point, the expectations was that there's a pandemic, global trade is going to decline, and the industry is going to just, it's going to be bad for the logistics industry and certainly for ocean freight. And that was kind of true up until May. And then as people kind of got used to the new reality, people who were fortunate to have money to spend shifted that spending from services like travel and entertainment to goods. And I think a lot of us can relate to, an increase of ordering stuff online to be delivered at home, especially things that we use at home. And so that was reflected here. We can see an increase from about June until May. Prices almost doubled to send a container to Asia to the US. By February, they had basically tripled. This got some coverage in the kind of mainstream media, was how all these, there was this surge of ocean freight, which normally only has a few month peak season. And we've had peak season levels basically since July until now through April, since last July. And all that freight really overwhelmed US ports, especially the biggest port in the West Coast, which is LA and Long Beach. And it got some coverage of all these container ships just floating in the bay there waiting to unload. And an interesting byproduct of that was that all this capacity and all these containers were stuck waiting to unload in the US. And all the demand that wanted to send stuff from Asia back to the US had no ships or containers to bring them there. And that's what we see in this orange and yellow spike, that in about November, rates from Asia to Europe spiked because there just weren't enough containers for rising demand in Europe. There weren't enough containers in Asia to satisfy the rising demand in Europe. And we had this mismatch of supply and demand, and rates quadrupled there from about November till the start of last year. So because of the way things have changed and consumer behaviors has changed, we see that reflected in just the volumes of goods that are being shipped by sea. And as we can see in our index, this is reflected in how prices have changed. In terms of where this is going and how it's impacted carriers, the expectations are that these kind of disruptions and elevated prices are really going to are not going to improve very much until things, quote unquote, go back to normal or somewhat more towards normal volumes, just because the capacity and the ability to process these volumes of containers just aren't there. So the expectations, they'll be backlogged until there's, the vaccinations take hold and some of that spending shifts. In terms of the impact on carriers, so it has been a very good year for ocean carriers. As Anton mentioned, though, a lot of ocean containers don't travel by spot. So the FBX is a spot index. It means if you have a one-off shipment and you want to book a container, this is the price that you're going to pay. If you have a longer commitment and you're committing to certain volumes, you have a lower price. So even though rates, doubled, quadrupled, or whatever on whatever lanes, the rates that the carriers actually were booking overall average was much lower than that. So it wasn't the extreme as the index suggests, but it was a very profitable year for ocean carriers. And there's been kind of a lot of resentment in the industry as a lot of people were suffering that carriers have enjoyed. But it's important to remember that the profitability this year, the report I just saw was something like double the total profit in the industry for the last 5 years. But the flip side of that is that there are often years where some ocean carriers typically lose money. So it's a very tough business for carriers to make to profit in sometimes. But this year or two, as it turns out, have been good for carriers.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting to see the data in front of us here. Also, just to see that it looks like it's going to be a good year for the upcoming year for everything kind of improving and just the prices going up in terms of overall the total. But that's awesome to hear. And to Judah, can you describe another example of how you kind of create reports and insights working with Anton?
Yeah, definitely. So this was actually something that Anton came across and threw my way. And again, it's kind of another real world example beyond just freight that kind of shows or can illustrate what impact different events are having in different areas. So here we're looking at our Asia to North Europe index lane in blue. So that's kind of the overall region to region to ship a container from Asia to Europe is our FBX 11. And then Anton compared this to the cost to ship a container from Shanghai to two ports in the UK, or the two major ports in the UK, which are Southampton and Felixstowe. These ports aren't actually part of our index, so they're not part of the calculation in FBX 11. But if we compared how they were behaving relative to our index rate for that region, we saw that more or less, and historical data goes back further, this was the case as well, more or less attract the same, about the same average rate, right up until the end of last year, the end of 2020. And the interesting part here is that the Brexit transition period ended on January 1st of 2021. So what we can see here is kind of a starting of a decoupling, that rates started to get more expensive to ship a container to the UK than it was to ship to nearby in Europe to Rotterdam or someplace like that. And this reflected kind of the anxiety and the need before these regulations changed, that UK importers were trying to, there was an increase in demand to try and bring goods in before the regulations changed. And we see that even after that the rates have stayed really elevated. So if they used to be about the same, we can see there's a difference of about 30% as we got further into the 2021. This kind of shows the impact of Brexit, and it also shows the impact of the pandemic, because some of the UK ports have been very hard hit in terms of the workforce being impacted by the virus or by changes in kind of the number of workers who are allowed to be there at once and things like that. And that's caused a lot of congestion and delays often mean higher prices if you want to send something there. This was very interesting. This was covered in the British press. And another interesting outcome was that based on that coverage, we had an economist who is set to testify in front of Parliament. I don't know if he actually did yet or not, or if he is. That was interested in this data as kind of part of his presentation of the Brexit impact. So that was another interesting kind of real world application.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting to see everything kind of in person right now. I know our audio listeners can't see the screen right now, but just seeing all the data here and the graphs here is super interesting because it's just relative to the work that you do right now. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Anton and Judah for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show. And where can everyone find you online just to connect with both of you?
So in my case, super easy. Just look up Anton Barr on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to contact. Facebook is for friends. So.
Yeah, you can find me there as well. You can also, if you're interested in FBX, it's at fdx.freightos.com. And also freightos.com will bring you into our main company page, which shows all the different business units and the types of research we provide.
Yeah, perfect. And to our audience, for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io. And thank you so much for both of you for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to have you and just to be able to see all of the great work that you're doing right now in the freight industry. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.